What happened to Ishbosheth, and why did this anger David? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of 2 Samuel on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing 2 Samuel chapter 4, verses 1 to 12. Before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to 2 Samuel chapter 4, verse 1. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So 2 Samuel chapter 4, beginning at verse 1. When Saul's son heard that Abner had died in Hebron, he lost heart, and all Israel was troubled. Now Saul's son had two men who were captains of troops. The name of one was Baanah, and the name of the other Rechab, the son of Rimmon the Beerothite, of the children of Benjamin. For Beeroth also was part of Benjamin, because the Beerothites fled to Gittaim, and have been sojourners there until this day. Jonathan, Saul's son, had a son who was lame in his feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel, and his nurse took him up and fled. And it happened, as she made haste to flee, that he fell and became lame. His name was Mephibosheth. Then the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, Rechab and Baanah, set out and came at about the heat of the day to the house of Ishbosheth, who was lying on his bed at noon. And they came there all the way into the house, as though to get wheat, and they stabbed him in the stomach. Then Rechab and Baanah his brother escaped, for when they had came into the house, he was lying on his bed in his bedroom. Then they struck him and killed him and beheaded him and took his head, and were all night escaping through the plain. And they brought the head of Ishbosheth to David at Hebron, and said to the king, Here is the head of Ishbosheth, the son of Saul your enemy, who sought your life. And the Lord has avenged my lord the king this day of Saul and his descendants. But David answered Rechab and Baanah his brother, the sons of Rimmon the Beerothite, and said to them, As the Lord lives, who has redeemed my life from all adversity, when someone told me, saying, Look, Saul is dead, thinking to have brought good news, I arrested him and had him executed in Ziklag, the one who thought I would give him a reward for his news. How much more when wicked men have killed a righteous person in his own house, on his bed? Therefore, shall I not now require his blood at your hand, and remove you from the earth? So David commanded his young men, and they executed them, cut off their hands and feet, and hanged them by the pool in Hebron. But they took the head of Ishbosheth and buried him in the tomb of Abner in Hebron. Since the death of Saul, David has been the rightful king of Israel, but only been reigning over the territory of Judah, while the other tribes followed after Ishbosheth, the last remaining son of Saul. This has happened for 7.5 years now. But David has been trusting in the Lord, knowing that when it was the Lord's will, David would be king over all Israel. Now Abner, Ishbosheth's general, had defected and was willing to convince the rest of Israel to follow after David. But Joab, David's general, killed Abner because Abner had killed Joab's brother Asahel in the heat of battle. When word of Abner's death made it back to Ishbosheth, it says that he lost heart, meaning the courage to act as king. Abner was the reason that Ishbosheth had any kingdom to reign over, and he was the muscle that had kept David from overthrowing him. What was he to do now without Abner, being as weak of a king as he was? Israel was also troubled, for it appeared that David had ordered the killing of Abner. What would he do to them had they continued to follow after Ishbosheth? The stage was now set for the ending of this rivalry and a reunification of the nation of Israel. So weak was Ishbosheth that as it turned out, he was killed by his own men, Rechab and Baanah, while resting at home. These men were from Beeroth, a city inside the borders of Benjamin, whose location has not been definitively identified. The author makes note that the Beerothites didn't actually live in Beeroth anymore, having fled to Gittaim for some unknown reason. Gittaim is mentioned only in one other place, Nehemiah chapter 11, and it appears that this city was also within the borders of Benjamin, but exactly where, we don't know. These two men, though, got into Ishbosheth's house with relative ease, as they made it appear that they were coming for grain. As Ishbosheth was resting for a moment in his bed at noon, the men came in and stabbed him in the stomach so that he died. They beheaded Ishbosheth and brought the head to David in Hebron. And like it was in chapter 1, these men thought that they were doing David a favor in killing Ishbosheth, meaning that David could now rule over all Israel. But just like in chapter 1, David was not pleased with what these men did. David trusted in the Lord to deliver him from his adversaries, and so he didn't need these men to commit a lawless act in order to help God out. David told the men that they had killed a righteous man in his own house and on his own bed. Now, I don't believe David is saying that Ishbosheth was righteous in all that he did, but what these men had done was take the law into their own hands by killing Ishbosheth, not in the heat of battle, not at the direction of a tribunal, but in cold blood. Such was not to be rewarded, even if it was done for the purpose of making David king over all Israel. So just like in chapter 1, as king, David judged these men guilty of murder and had them executed. As for the head of Ishbosheth, it was buried in the tomb of Abner, thus not being desecrated by the house of David, showing us that even though Ishbosheth rebelled against David, David would respect the son of the Lord's anointed, King Saul. The final piece of information we get from this chapter is in verse 4 concerning an as of yet unknown son of Jonathan, Mephibosheth. At the time of Saul's death, Mephibosheth was 5 years old. So assuming that Ishbosheth was killed 7.5 years into David's reign, Mephibosheth would be 12 or 13 at this time. We're told that Mephibosheth is lame as a result of him falling while leaving with his nurse in haste upon word of his father's death. Remember this man, Mephibosheth, for he will come up later on in our study of 2 Samuel. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 1 to 16, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.